Nobody seems to be motivated economically or politically to cross-examine the mediocrity of our higher education system, let alone to carry out experiments or innovations that could fundamentally improve it. In terms of what's possible within my lifetime, we need more dissent. We need more demands for fundamental radical change. I'm very skeptical about this kind of question because I'm aware of what an atypical language learner I am myself. I'm really deeply aware that what works for me doesn't work for 98% of other people trying to learn a language. So I'm actually open to the radical, disruptive possibility that what goes on in the classroom should be 100% spoken language, or that the most effective method could actually be 0% spoken language. Because to some extent, this is a judgment on human nature itself. It's a judgment on what kind of person learns a language, with what kind of motivations, what they do outside of the classroom, what they learn despite formal education. There are a lot of variables here I can't pretend to know without doing the research. The question is, who is going to do the research? When you're talking about science, and when you're talking about the impacts science will have on society, it's very important to separate things that are unknowable from things that merely happen to be unknown. There's always going to be a political or economic explanation for why things remain unknown that are in fact knowable. Scientific research can cost millions of dollars. And if you were the one paying or investing those millions of dollars, what are the odds that this research will actually earn back your investment? In some cases, there's absolutely no chance of you earning any money whatsoever out of scientific research. We knew a woman who had a 3-legged dog. She believed in the vegan diet, not only for humans, but also for dogs. She fed this dog a strictly vegan diet. It had a whole series of unbelievable health problems. She got advice from all the best websites. She downloaded seemingly well-researched scientific claims of what you should feed your dog if you wanted to have a vegan diet. And in her case, it just didn't work. And I remember I talked to her about this face to face. I was like, look, we barely know that veganism works for human beings. There hasn't been a whole hell of a lot of research done. If you take a multivitamin pill every day and you're vegan, you're going to be fine. That's been established, but it's not some big research priority. Who would pay millions of dollars to investigate the adequacy of a vegan diet for dogs? Nobody's going to do that research. Nobody could make the money back, and nobody in Parliament is going to pay for it. It's not like a democratic government is going to sit down and say, look, guys, this is a research priority. We need to allocate money. We need to make it a priority to figure out what is the healthiest diet for vegan dogs. You're not going to get some kind of incentive coming from the military, right? Military applications, major source of scientific and technological innovation in our society. We wouldn't have saran wrap without the U.S. military trying to research the best way to make a submachine gun bulletproof when carrying it through the swamps of Cambodia and Vietnam. That's the origin of saran wrap, having this kind of plastic wrap. They'd wrap up the guns, march through the swamp, and then you could whip it out and go into action. If you got ambushed, it was real quick to tear it off and go into action. True story. All right. So look, when you talk about scientific progress, talking about what's knowable but still unknown, you've got to think of this in both economic and political terms. What do you think is more effective? Having university students take 4 different courses in 4 years, or take the same course again and again and again and again? Does that sound preposterous to you? I have a background in the theater. I understand how theatrical education works for, memorizing and performing a script, like let's say it's Shakespeare, for memorizing and performing dance movements, physical movements, certain types of music, I don't think all, memorizing and performing something precisely until it's 100% accurate. A lot of military education also has to do with drill, with performing the same set of motions, the same set of actions again and again and again until it's perfect. Right? In a totally unquestioned manner, what our universities tell people is 51% is a pass. It's a D minus. Right? 75% is fine. It's like a B plus, right? We had a standard at our university. You needed to get 70% to go from level 1 to level 2 in Japanese or Chinese. So 70% is good enough. Then, of course, you look at the actual exams, you look at the actual in-class exercises, and to get 70% is incredibly sloppy, like the way you're evaluated. You're not remotely mastering the language material to get 70%. It's way more like 30% mastery to get a grade of 70%. Because like what's considered a right answer and a wrong answer on the exams, there's a lot of leeway, right? It's not pushing you to get 100% accuracy, right? So let's say we take 200 university students and we put them through a normal university course in Chinese. Normal kind of strictures. Like, look, guys, you need to really get 70% to pass this course and go on to the next course, okay? 100 of the students, half of the class, you then have go on to the level 2 course, new vocabulary, new textbook, the sequel to the level 1 textbook. So they did 1 year of the level 1 course, they go on to the level 2 course normally. And then you take the other half of the students and you say to them, look, that wasn't remotely good enough. You guys didn't really master, you didn't really learn the vocabulary and the grammar in the level 1 textbook. So you're going to do it again. And this time, you have to aim to get 99%. We are going to push you to achieve perfection. And the passing grade for this course is now 95%. If you get under 95, you fail. We're going to give you the same lectures, it's not going to be identical, but you're going to come. You're going to have 1 full year, same amount of time. You're going to hear the same lectures. You're going to read the same stories in the textbook. You're going to have basically the same tests for the same vocabulary and the same grammar. But this time, you're going to master it. You're going to have it down cold. You're not going to stutter. You are going to come in, and when you have to perform for the class, when you have to perform these dialogues, you are going to perform. This is going to be at the same level of excellence as performing arts school, where you're singing and dancing so that you can be good enough for Broadway, so that you can audition with this. Your enunciation, your elocution, your memorization, how well you speak the language, how well you write the language, your handwriting, you're going to take pride in. You are going to give it 110%, and you're going to try to get above 95% in this otherwise completely crappy, mediocre, normal university course. This is a 2-year experiment with 200 people. Which class do you think is going to have better results? Right? I would bet money the class that takes the same course twice, 1 year after another, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, the class that does the fundamental level 1 course twice will have a huge advantage in that language for the rest of their lives, because it's the material taught in the level 1 course that is the most important for you to master. It is the most difficult for you to master, especially in your first year of being exposed to a totally new language, totally new way of thinking, totally new sound system. Like it's hard to listen to, it's hard to follow, right? And also because these are human beings who are alive 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and even if they are somewhat bored to have exactly the same vocabulary and the same stories and the same exercises in the classroom, right? Outside of the classroom, they're going to be listening to this language or practicing it. They're going to be doing things to amuse themselves with the language, to make it interesting for themselves. That's going to remain their duty outside of class, right? This is the world's simplest experiment. Questioning the value of repetition in language learning. Is there really any doubt in your mind that repetition is a tremendously important part of language learning, and yet it is not in any way part of our university system of education. Like, our university system of education is based on the idea that novelty is the most important part of language acquisition. And again, compare that to military concepts of education, compare that to performing arts school, and the extent to which language itself is a performance. So like, you're expected in a split second to summon up the vocabulary and perform in the course of having a dialogue. Now, just say, to argue against my position for a moment, I think some people might say to me that what I've just proposed makes sense for Chinese. Maybe it makes sense for Sanskrit, Latin, but that it wouldn't make sense for modern French. They'd say, oh, but there's no point with modern French. Once you've done the level 1 course, then you can just go on to level 2 in French. There's no point. It's not as involuted and complex and difficult as getting to write the Chinese characters correctly or getting to hear. I completely disagree. All right? I live in Canada, where I am completely surrounded by people who did all of high school and all of university studying French, and they still suck at the fundamentals of the French language that are taught in that year 1, level 1 course. They never got them down. They never achieved perfection. They never achieved accuracy and reliability in nailing those fundamentals. Partly phonetic and phonological, partly grammatical, partly kind of philosophical, like the real rudiments of the language. I once had a conversation with a guy. He was born and raised in Sri Lanka. He was Sinhalese, and I was a white guy learning the ancient language Pali. The language Pali is powerfully linked to modern Sri Lanka. Not worth explaining the whole sociolinguistic situation. We had this long conversation talking about the history of the language and how to study it and its connections to Buddhist philosophy and connections to the history and politics of Sri Lanka. And he was very impressed with me. He probably had never met another white guy who had that level of knowledge of the language thing. And so we had this conversation, and then he said to me, he was very dramatic in his manner of speaking, as many Sinhalese are. He said, well, show me the textbook you're using. Like, how did you learn this? Like, show me the language of it. And I said, I have it in my pocket, of course, which is true. Back then, when I was studying a language, I would carry it on me. You know what I mean? And it was a textbook I'd kind of made myself. Not worth talking about. And so I whipped this thing out. It's put together from photocopies. When I say I made it myself, I pieced it together myself. And he looks at it and he says, "Oh, but this is incredibly rudimentary. Like you must be much too advanced for that." And I said to him, "On the contrary, I'm on page 12, but I know the first 11 pages exceedingly well." I meant it as a punchline, but it was also literally true. When I studied the Pali language, I memorized every single word in the textbook. I worked on it thoroughly. All right? And all these people perceive me as a genius. That guy's not the best example. There were people with PhDs and professors. I met all these professors who didn't know any of the stuff I knew, right? And the reality was they never got the foundations. They never got the foundations in the language, and then they never got the foundations in terms of philology, and they couldn't just pick up a page in this language and read it and cope. They couldn't deal with the orthography, the whole story of the stuff. I've been around a lot of those guys with PhDs. And why? Look, I can sympathize. The guys I knew who had PhDs, even when their PhD was Pali, they had a PhD just in this language, nothing else, right? They had a 1-year university course doing the fundamentals that they had to rush through while they were taking 4 other courses, depending on your system, maybe 6 other courses, whatever university system is, right? And they probably had a girlfriend. They might have had a part-time job, right? And it's this yeah mentality. Oh, yeah. I got to hustle. I got to get 75% on the exam. I got to get 80% on the exam. And 80% doesn't mean 80% in our university system, not with the knowledge of languages. I don't know any field of study where 80% really means 80%. 80% means good enough, right? It definitely doesn't mean that without any handwritten notes to help you, without being able to use the dictionary on your mobile phone or computer, that you know that vocabulary, that you have it down cold, that you can summon it up from memory in a split second when it's needed, that you've really done the drill to be able to use the language. And even when reading, even when doing rapid reading comprehension without the aid of a dictionary, without the aid of a computer or a cell phone, right? It doesn't mean you can do any of that, getting 80% in a language course. And these guys, the guys who had PhDs, I know they then had to roll on. Then next year, it's a new course and a new with a language like PAL, you're lucky to get 2 years of university language education. And then, everyone's ushering you along. Oh, yes. Well, the important thing is to take this advanced course on linguistic theory or philosophy or the history of Asia or something. Let's get you writing essays about linguistic concepts or sociolinguistics. Nobody really cares about whether or not you have the fundamental competence in this language. I've seen so many things written by people with PhDs who knew less Pali than I did. They lacked my competence in Laotian, in Thai, in Cambodian. I have a book review still up with that. It's like, sorry, I know this much Cambodian, but I knew more than people with PhDs in that field, right? I know how the system works. I know what doesn't work. And I have sympathy for the people who are the greatest victors in that system. The people who are most privileged by, most advantaged by that system. Because from my perspective, they are ultimately its most pathetic victims. They end up with a credential that says they're fluent in this language, says that they're competent, and they spend their whole lives struggling, lacking utterly the necessary competence. I have seen experiments of this kind done in sports education. I've seen experiments of this type done in bodybuilding, in sports like baseball, and in sports like basketball, where people really seriously ask the question, what is the most effective way to teach someone to throw a ball faster in baseball? What is the most effective way to increase people's accuracy in shooting a basketball? And they really rigorously compare different methodologies of teaching. In bodybuilding, it's all on another level. Is it more effective to lift twice as much weight in 3 weeks or to more gradually increase your weight? All of that gets tested rigorously, all right? And of course, there are economic explanations for that more than there are political in this case. I have never seen and never heard of any study that simply compared the efficacy of having more and less emphasis on the spoken elements of language. I've seen so many people with PhDs, shout out to Victor Mayer, who's a complete imbecile. Great example of an imbecile with a PhD, by the way. I've seen so many people making grandiose claims that their own method of language learning alone is superior because of its emphasis on spoken language or its emphasis on written language, this kind of thing. I have never seen anyone say, divide a body of 400 students into 4 groups. Let's just ask ourselves hypothetically, what will be more effective? If we spend absolutely 0 time in class speaking, where the spoken component of the language is 0. This is a scenario I have lived through at the University of Victoria. Absolutely 0 spoken language. And why? Because it's expensive to actually pay a professor or tutor to sit there and speak with you and correct your speaking, whereas it's cheap to just give a lecture to 40 students or 400 students who sit in silence and take notes. There's an economic reason why silent note-taking and people doing multiple choice exams while listening to an audio CD playing, these sorts of things take priority in the university setting over actual spoken practice, conversational drill, or theatrics, getting on stage and performing a scene with a professor or someone correcting you. How effective do you think it could possibly be to teach students Chinese without speaking? In the total absence of speaking, how well can anyone learn a language like Chinese? Sadly, this is not a hypothetical question. Many university programs, because they're trying economically to be as efficient as possible, they don't want to pay a professor or tutor to sit with you one-on-one and practice dialogues back and forth. They just want to pay a professor to stand at the front of the room, behind a podium, give a lecture to 40 students, or even more profitable, give a lecture to 400 students. Have them all take notes in silence. Have them watch a movie in silence. Have them listen to an audio CD and then fill out a Q&A test, right? Do multiple choice exams while listening to an audio CD. That's profitable for university. Paying for one-on-one language training where you really practice speaking, where the professor hears you and catches the mistake you're making and corrects you and says, okay, now say it again. That's expensive. Why has nobody ever endeavored to do a study where you practice the efficacy of teaching a language with no speaking component at all, as opposed to 25% of the curriculum being speaking practice, as opposed to 50% being speaking practice, as opposed to 75% being speaking practice, as opposed to 100% of the educational experience being just the spoken language? There are specialists, there are experts who claim the most effective way to achieve language fluency is 100% focus on the spoken language in terms of formal education and what it provides to you. It seems intuitively obvious that neither 0% nor 100% could be the best course of action. But the honest truth is, we don't know. Scientifically, this is something that's not unknowable. It's something that's just unknown. I'm very skeptical about this kind of question because I'm aware of what an atypical language learner I am myself. I'm really deeply aware that what works for me doesn't work for 98% of other people trying to learn a language. So I'm actually open to the radical disruptive possibility that what goes on in the classroom should be 100% spoken language, or that the most effective method could actually be 0% spoken language. Because to some extent, this is a judgment on human nature itself. It's a judgment on what kind of person learns a language, with what kind of motivations, what they do outside of the classroom, what they learn despite formal education. There are a lot of variables here I can't pretend to know without doing the research. The question is, who is going to do the research? In discussing this kind of problem, pathetically, the conclusion we come to is there are very few sources of innovation in education. Who's going to try new, different, exciting, interesting things? Possibly multimillionaires. Possibly the innovation comes from the government. Possibly it comes from the military or the diplomatic corps. Once in a long while, an eccentric millionaire or a group of eccentric millionaires put their money together to try something new and different. In terms of what's possible within my lifetime, we need more dissent. We need more demands for fundamental radical change in education. It's very obvious now what the economic demand is and what the political demand is for electric cars and for improvements in solar power. So we all know that research is going to get done and that change is going to happen. But there's absolutely nothing inevitable about change or improvement in education, let alone language education in specific. As soon as people have university credentials, it is in their interest to exaggerate the value of those credentials. Nobody seems to be motivated economically or politically to cross-examine the mediocrity of our higher education system, let alone to carry out experiments or innovations that could fundamentally improve it. Maybe we can practice doing the puppet show together.
Yes, that's all I needed. I need it all.